Today's learning objective is to gain an understanding of competitive and non-competitive methods to contracting. At the end of this class, my goal is for students to be able to identify various solicitation types, differentiate between an RFP and IFB, explain what is a sole source contract, and discuss when to use competitive or non-competitive methods to contracting. Before we begin, there are some terms I'd like everyone to get familiar with, as they will be used throughout this lecture. The first is a request for information, or RFI. Next is request for proposals, or RFP. An invitation for bids, or IFB, which may sometimes be referred to as request for quotation, or RFQ. There is another emerging method called reverse auctions, but for today's lecture, we will not cover it. We will also discuss sole source contracts, as well as single source or directed awards. The first method is called a request for information. RFIs are typically used to solicit information from the marketplace. Such information may be to learn more about a particular product or service, pricing for budgetary purposes, or to better understand warranty and maintenance support options. RFIs may also be used to gauge or test interest in a business requirement or strategy. I have seen RFIs used in a research and development environment to source for potential suppliers of commodities and services not yet readily available in the market. Usually, the issuance of RFIs precede other competitive methods. It is important to note that RFI responses are not binding on the buyer or seller. Therefore, RFIs are not used as basis to award a contract. However, RFIs may result in an approved list of suppliers who are then invited to participate in an RFP solicitation. An RFI may also result in a qualified products list, which may then be the basis for bids to be requested. Now we will talk about request for proposals. RFPs utilize sealed bidding principles wherein sealed proposals are received and opened at a prescribed date and time. The RFP process brings a structured approach to the procurement decision and is meant to allow the risks and benefits to be identified clearly upfront. RFPs are used to acquire services or goods where the expertise and knowledge from the vendor are more critical and not as simple to measure or quantify. The RFP document presents preliminary requirements for the commodity or service and may dictate to varying degrees the exact structure and format of the supplier's response. A key characteristic of an RFP is that it typically involves more than a request for the price. There is strong emphasis on qualifications, skills, expertise, and experience. Other requested information may include basic corporate information and history, financial information, which asks can the company deliver without risk of bankruptcy, technical capability, or where the requirement could be met by varying technical means. Product information such as stock availability and estimated completion period, as well as customer references that can be checked to determine a company's suitability. The evaluation criteria for an RFP is designed to select the best value as evaluated by a source selection or review committee. RFPs are widely used in the private sector, however, government use is permissible. Like an RFP, an invitation for bid or IFB informs suppliers that an organization is looking to procure and is soliciting bid offers. This alerts suppliers that the selection process is underway and a competitive approach is being used. An IFB requires the buying entity to define or specify what it proposes to purchase through a specification or detailed requirements document. IFBs may utilize open or closed bid lists. When an open bid list is used, it means that any and all interested parties may participate and submit a bid response. This is mostly seen in government sector procurement, where notices are posted in a publication of wide circulation, such as a newspaper daily, or online to invite prospective bidders to submit an offer. Closed bids, on the other hand, refer to a situation where only specific vendors are invited to participate in the IFB. IFBs are generally expected to follow a structured process so that an organization can demonstrate impartiality. This is a crucial factor in public sector procurements. A close cousin of the IFB is called an RFQ, or request for quotation. RFQs are very similar to IFBs, but oftentimes refer to the process of requesting oral or written bids on small purchases. Here's a quick side-by-side comparison of an RFP and an IFB. Notice that there are some bullet points highlighted which are important to remember in case of a quiz or exam. We just covered 3 examples of competitive methods to contracting, namely RFIs, RFPs, and IFBs. Now we're going to talk about non-competitive methods, the first of which is a sole source contract. A sole source contract refers to a factual and verifiable situation where there is only one person or company that can provide the contractual goods and services needed. So any attempt to obtain bids would only result in that person or company bidding on it. Sole source contracts can be negotiated much more quicker than a typical competitive contract because only one vendor is considered. On the other hand, they are often fraught with suspicion that the company used illegal or immoral means to exclude competitors, usually by cronyism or bribery. Hence, the risk of abuse is deemed to be high. In many cases, a sole source request may reflect personal preference rather than a true sole source. It is important to remember that sole source procurements cannot be used to avoid competition. Use in government is highly scrutinized and controlled by applicable statutes. A compelling sole source request justification makes a clear and convincing link between the program requirements and why the sole source is the only vendor or contractor capable of meeting those requirements. Simple statements regarding compatibility or other ambiguous reasoning may result in increased time to approve a sole source request. It may also result in converting the sole source to a competitive solicitation process. In the US, legal justification for federal contracts may include the following rationale. However, use of authorities written requires written justification and approval at specified levels. Next, we will talk about single source contracts, which may also be referred to as directed awards. In a single source procurement, there are 2 or more vendors available to supply the commodities or services. However, the buyer selects a specific supplier due to substantial reasons, thereby eliminating the competitive bidding process. In this context, single means the one among others, as in singling out a specific vendor to buy and contract with. Examples of factors to consider to arrive at a single source procurement may include compatibility, interoperability of systems or components, as well as for use in experimental or research purposes.
So we've talked about various contracting methods, whether it's RFP, request for proposals, RFI, request for information, invitation for bids, sealed bids in the earlier slides. The book provides a really good graphic of comparing these various contracting methods. When you look at competitive bidding, you can think about sealed bids. In the government contracting world, that's Federal Acquisition Regulations Part 14, or competitive proposals or negotiations, which is FAR Part 15. And then we also touched on non-competitive, which is single source or sole source negotiation. So how do you distinguish or differentiate these? And the key ones really, when it comes to competitive bidding or IFBs versus RFPs, one of the things I wanted to share with the class is a good way of thinking or understanding the difference between the two would be, imagine if you want to go from point A to point B. If you know that you want to go to point B and you know how to get there, let's say you want to rent a car, sealed bidding is about asking for a price for that car rental to get to point B. Whereas RFPs, or request for proposals, you know you want to go from point A to point B, but you don't know how to get there, thus you're asking or requesting for proposals because there are many different ways to get you there. Fly you by plane, rent a car, train, bus. So as sellers provide proposals and technical ways to get you to point B, you have to balance cost or pricing, offered, technical ability, the quality of the service, vis-a-vis your requirements to get there. And that's competitive negotiations. When you look at the steps, for the most part, they start off with identifying your requirements, planning, putting in your requisition, and then you go through the solicitation phase of either inviting for bids or requesting for proposals. In general, competitive negotiations take longer than sealed bidding because of the extra steps and additional analysis, whether you're looking at technical proposal and cost proposal, then a short list before you go into negotiations and discussions and making a final decision of selecting an awardee. So again, that's the key takeaway for me when I compare what's the difference between an IFB from an RFP. IFB, your requirements are generally known, you have firm specifications or requirements, and you're essentially asking for a price for those requirements. When you think about RFP, you know your objectives, you have an idea of your deliverables, but you're asking the sellers to provide different ways to achieve or fulfill those objectives.
Before we close, I'd like to quickly summarize what we learned today. We identified various solicitation types that are competitive and non-competitive. We talked about differences between an RFP and IFB. We covered what is meant by a sole source contract and discussed factors to consider when using a single source approach to contracting. I hope you enjoyed today's class. I look forward to next week's lecture. Thank you.